Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies I have just seen as I am driving home from the theater. And we have another one of those interesting release date quandaries on this one, because according to the research I was able to do, this movie premiered at one of the film festivals in 2023. However, it was not released to American theaters until August 8th of this year. So, by that logic, it means that it is a 2025 release and is eligible for one of my reviews and therefore placement on end-of-the-year lists and all the rights and honors attributed thereto. For precedent, I cite the pivotal case of it's my show and I'll do what I want. Okay, so this is one of those films that fits into that little subcategory of coming home for an event and family drama. I don't know what you call those, family drama movies or plays. They're very big on Broadway, these shows where, you know, disjointed and estranged family members all converge, usually to celebrate some arbitrary event, a holiday, a wedding, an anniversary. Mom is sick, dad's, got rickets, I don't know. But there's usually some reason that brings all our quirky and offbeat characters together so they can rehash all the old drama from their youth. You broke my Barbie, you married my He-Man to my G.I. Joe, all of that type of stuff. And again, plays and smaller films really love this trope because you can confine the action to one prime location. It's not that expensive to shoot or to stage. And it keeps your core cast relatively small. So you can see why it's a big hit on Broadway and independent movies. So going into it right away, I was like, okay, let's see how many of the tropes they have that we can fill out on our movie trope bingo card. So, if you haven't heard of it, which is very possible, this is the story of three daughters, played by Scarlett Johansson, Sienna Miller, and Emily Beckham. Or Beecham, I think. I'm sorry, Beecham. Who are coming back to their small little English country village for their mother's wedding. Their mother is getting married now for the third time. So pay attention so you understand the chain of events here in the exposition. So, Scarlett Johansson and Sienna Miller's father was a army pilot who was killed. I think he was killed in Bosnia. So then their mother married his best friend, their stepdad, who they loved just as much as their biological father. For that marriage, they had Emily Beecham, but then dad number two also was killed, I think in Bosnia in a training action. I couldn't keep straight which dad died in which incident. But, so you have the three sisters, two fathers, two husbands, and now mom is getting married to a third guy who is, boring and, a little quirky, but not an overly exciting, die defending our country kind of way. So the daughters fall into the typical estranged family sibling tropes. You've got Scarlett Johansson, who's the serious one. She is a Navy captain and is about to be promoted to the first woman to command a battleship. Sienna Miller is the pretty one. She's the actor. All these ones, there's always one who's a famous actor. You know, it's like one of their favorite tropes. And of course, Emily Beecham is the domestic one, the married one whose husband is cheating on her left, right, and center, and is debating what to do. You know, again, these are fairly typical in terms of this type of movie and their tropes. I will say, one of the tropes that they avoid, and I'm very happy about because I always think it's the most convoluted, is no one in this one is dying. No one has a secret illness, or mom's long-standing illness is finally rearing its ugly head and they only have a few minutes with her. It's not pulling that. You know, so you don't have the dying elder who suddenly has all the wisdom of the universe. As my mom likes to say, I got cancer twice and I didn't get smart. So they do avoid that. Now here's where I want to bring in one of my favorite lines. I say this in a lot of movies, and because it's very true. It's one of my standards for films. Cliche, tropes, stock characters are not a bad thing. They're shorthand. So it isn't, when I describe how the three daughter characters fit into these long-standing tropes, that's not a criticism. The criticism would come if the characters were not well written, not well acted, and were just standing on the laurels of their stock character and expecting that to carry them through. And much to my delight, I did not find that to be the case with this movie, at least not to an offensive degree. I think that Sienna Miller and Emily Beecham's characters are a little bit more cliche than Scarlett Johansson's, but not by much. It's not a huge thing. Because what I felt from the minute all three of them arrived on screen and began sharing scenes together is that this is one of the only one of these I've ever watched where I really did feel like this was a family. Like these three were actually sisters with established history and connections and, you know, anger but love. The scenes they shared together are often very quiet and very personal. Not a lot of big dramatic moments until kind of about the middle of Act 2. And then kind of the dam births. But what I like is that, unlike other films or plays in this kind of genre, you don't ever question, do these characters actually love each other? Like, it's there, and you can see that they truly love one another. I've seen some of these, again, both on stage and in film, where you're watching it going, why do you hate your family so much? You know, and maybe I don't understand it because I was not raised with siblings. So that's a dynamic I can never truly understand. But the best families that I have known where there are siblings, yes, they fight and they scrape and they scratch, and there's always some underlining, you did this to me 40 years ago and I just have never gotten over it kind of bullshit. There's always that combining string, that uniting force of pure love for the person. You know what does this very well? Okay, great example. An episode of Bob's Burgers that was on recently where Tina and Louise get into a fight, and it's like the worst fight they've ever been in, and they talk about this, the sibling relationship and the sister relationship specifically, and you hate the other person, but you're also obsessed with them and love them and judge yourself by them and never feel like you're as good as or as loved as, but you still can't be without the person. I think that episode really encapsulates it. And this relationship, these three actors, and Kristen Scott Thomas, who's both the writer and director and who plays the mom, they really do come together and form an honest family unit. And not just them, but the extended family too. Each of their kids, all three of the girls have kids, and their children feel very natural in their relationships and their interactions. Her new husband fits into this and feels like a real person. I also like that, and I know this is kind of based on Kristen Scott Thomas's real life. I like how the three dads are all good people, and the girls love all three of them. I love how Scarlett Johansson and Sienna Miller loved their stepfather just as much as their biological father. And they show, they respect and like the new guy, even if they don't know him as well and think he's a little bit boring. But they still treat him with respect and welcome him into the family. I like seeing that. This is a really loving, this isn't a dysfunctional family, I think is the thing. And you owe a lot of that to the three major pillars: the actors, the writer, and the director, who in this case is also one of the actors. You really do feel like this is a slice of, this could be anybody's family. And it's little touches sometimes. Like I said, the big blow up doesn't really come until towards the end of Act 2, when the full extent of Emily Beacham's husband's cheating really comes to light, and that just kind of turns her anger up, so she goes on the attack, and then the other two go on the attack just because it's a natural, fight or flight response. And they get into an ugly fight where, Emily Beacham pushes them into this little stream. But what I love is there's this little touches after they do that. They all kind of gasp, take a breath, and then they help each other out of the stream. This is something that happens. We get angry, we yell, we say things, but you're always my sister and I always love you. I liked that. I liked that a lot. I also really liked, as I mentioned, there is no wise dying elder in this, but the mom character, again, Kristen Scott Thomas, which, we shouldn't be too surprised as she wrote and directed it. I know when I, write plays, I usually write the character that is the coolest one based on me, of course. Why wouldn't I? I love how their mom is wise, but it's clearly wisdom gained not from, facing your own mortality, but just from having lived life. There is a great scene. I actually rewound it. I watched this on Fandango Home. I actually rewound it to watch this monologue twice because I liked it so much. Where after the girls kind of have this fight, and after a couple other elements happen, and they're all on edge and they're all mad, and Sienna Miller says something kind of hurtful to the new husband. Kristen Scott Thomas takes the girls to their father's graves and basically just gives them a talking to, this monologue about you are three girls who have never grown out of loving your daddies, but you have to understand they weren't perfect men, they weren't demigods, they were young men who made the same mistakes that young men everywhere make. They weren't perfect, and you've got to stop measuring every other person in your life, be they a romantic partner or, other men or whatever. Stop stop comparing them all to these two perfect human beings that never actually existed. And I really dug that. I liked the way that she wrote it and performed it, in the aspect of she loved all three of her husbands. And they were good men, but they weren't perfect. They weren't gods. You know, that they made mistakes, that she and them had problems. One of the core elements, so this, one of the core things in this is that Scarlett Johansson's character is having some real issues reconciling her mom getting married and taking her new husband's name over the ones that she had, because apparently back in the day, her stepfather had come to her and asked if he could adopt her and her sister and give them her name, and Scarlett Johansson, as an 11-year-old, said, absolutely not, that's my dad's name. And that, of course, you know, to add to the guilt, that's the last conversation that she had with him before he was killed. So, of course, she's been carrying this guilt around with her. And her mom, during this big monologue, kind of lays it out that, you know, he wanted you to take his name because he felt the old one was too ordinary. I didn't have the guts to tell him no, so I sent him to you because I knew you would tell him no. So it's like, it's one of those things of the guilt we carry around, and the elements from our childhood that we tend to cling to are not always accurate. We're not reliable narrators sometimes in our own story, because we only have half the information, and sometimes less than that. And it's this great thing of, you know, live your lives, you know, be there for your kids, and, you know, stop trying to fill the hole left by, again, these two guys that didn't really exist. So yeah, this movie, and maybe it's because it hasn't been in wide release, but like all the ratings on it, I don't trust like Rotten Tomatoes and star ratings. I don't trust those very often. Because a lot of times when I see a thing from Rotten Tomatoes that is like, oh, this is like a 50-something, I actually find it to be a fairly delightful film. And this movie, I was ready to kind of just say, okay, this is just a fairly flat, nothing new to see here kind of film. But it's all in these, sometimes it's these little details that elevate something up from kind of just another one in a genre to something that actually is very, very sweet and warm, and does feel like the catharsis of getting all your anger out at family or friends or close people, and also that equal feeling of catharsis at patching everything up and knowing that those people are still always going to be there for you. And we have to give a lot of credit to Kristen Scott Thomas on this, because it takes a lot of courage to kind of put what is clearly some difficult feelings and very personal interactions onto the screen. I wonder sometimes watching this, like, who is her self-insert character? Because this is based on a true story, but so she's playing the mom, but I get the feeling that her character is more the Sienna Miller character, since she's the actress. But the movie is told almost exclusively from Scarlett Johansson's perspective. So Scarlett Johansson is the main character. So I wonder, like, how closely they are based on real people. You know, I don't know if Kristen Scott Thomas has sisters. I would assume with this specific of detail, I would assume she did, and these characters are loosely based on them. I wonder how how closely, and I wonder how much of herself she kind of put into each character, because this does feel extremely personal. And as I said, even though Sienna Miller and Emily Beecham's characters are not as fleshed out and don't get as much screen time to work through their particular character arcs, they still feel like fully fleshed out people. I guess that would lead into some of the issues with the movie. I think the first issue is, it feels like a couple of the stories are very rushed and a little bit more in the cliche area than Scarlett Johansson's. Like I say, Sienna Miller feels like she got waylaid from a Hallmark movie somewhere, because she's being courted by both some rich French guy who's trying to buy her affections, and Dirk Squarejaw, some bearded bloke who lives in the town that has some kind of connection to her. I can't quite recall if they had dated before or something, but you can tell the minute he shows up, like, oh, you're the Hallmark love interest guy. And it feels like a lot of that story did not get any time to really take shape or breathe. It was just kind of... her stuff was more just kind of a series of things that happened, and that are very loosely connected. Likewise, I think Emily Beecham gets the real short end of the stick in terms of character arc and on-screen pathos, because we've seen this kind of thing before. We've seen this is every First Wives Club kind of thing, the cheating husband. I will say that they get very creative to the extent of his cheating and what he was physically doing. Again, I wonder how much of this is based on real life, because I can totally see a big sister putting something this humiliating into a movie just to get back at the ex-husband of her younger sister. I can totally see that. But yeah, hers is very much the kind of the flattest of the three stories. Again, her performance is really good, and I love, she has individual scenes with both Sienna Miller and Scarlett Johansson, and it's really sweet to kind of see that she went to both of her big sisters, but the relationships are very different. Not bad, just different. With Sienna Miller, it's a very cuddly, very, they're leaning on each other. She cries in her lap. Sienna Miller puts her feet in her lap. It's a very physically connected relationship. Whereas she and Scarlett Johansson, there's still a level of being comforted by your older sibling, but it's a much more, I think, her presence, her sternness, her power. Because they don't really cuddle or anything, but she does kind of lay with her to kind of feel safe. So it's really well done. Just tiny differences like that illustrate the differences in the sibling relationship. I'll also say that I think it's a good thing. It's kind of like Sinners a little bit. That it's good that all of the characters are so interesting, and the family dynamic is so well done that you kind of wish you'd spent more time with all of the characters. The kids are all fun. Scarlett Johansson's son, Sienna Miller's son have a nice cousin relationship. We don't get much out of the Emily Beecham's two daughters, but they have some cute relationships with the other two. There's a third kid, a tall boy who's hanging around. He's in the background of a lot of shots, and it's like, who are you? I don't know if they ever introduced him or who the hell he was. So yeah, I was very confused by that. I didn't know who this kid was. They also don't show us a lot, I guess maybe because we're trying to see it from the sisters' perspective, so we're only privy to the information they have. But like at one point, Sienna Miller's son gets drunk and is up in a tree and doesn't want to come down, and it's like, wait, when did this happen? Like, it's a very confusing scene, but if you were a parent woken up out of bed in the middle of the night because, you know, either your nephew or your son was sitting up in a tree clearly wasted, yeah, you wouldn't have all the facts either. So I guess that does kind of add to the anxiety of the scene. I guess it is one of those things where we're so used to being spoon-fed all facts and info that, yeah. I mentioned it, I liked the new husband. I liked that I've been in a similar situation, and I can say from personal experience that it is a very difficult role to fill, especially with kids who are older, not necessarily adults in my case, but they have their own opinions, and they know their biological father and all that. So I respected how well he played the thing of he wants to be part of their lives, but he doesn't want to push and make them feel like he's forcing himself into their life. And, you know, it's a very thin line, a very razor's edge you got to walk when you're in that situation. And, you know, if you're like me, you end up falling off and slicing your leg off. But this guy, I really felt that from my perspective of that's a good, and I like that the girls, you know, unlike in my case, you know, the girls clearly liked him, thought he was a little boring, but they came to respect him and welcome him into the family. So I thought that was well done. I guess the other thing that does it, I don't know. It didn't work as well for me. I don't know why. So we're told from the beginning, we see it in emails and other characters bring it up, that Scarlett Johansson's character has a lover by the name of Jack. And we don't see Jack for a long time. We know that they're co-parenting Scarlett Johansson's son. I'm not quite sure where the son came from. That's a little confusing, but, you know, whatever. But Scarlett Johansson is very distant and doesn't want to connect, and doesn't want to connect with Jack, and therefore is pulling further and further away from her own son. Plus her job as a Navy captain keeps her away for long stretches. She doesn't want to make that commitment because of the issues she had growing up and the loss of her fathers and so on and so forth. And we come to find out, you know, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. It's spoiler alert!
No, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Maybe say spoiler before you give away the end of a movie, okay?
We come to find out Jack is in fact a woman. You know, an Indian woman. And what I love about this is that I like how this is just a fact. It's not something that's brought up. It's not something that is an issue. You know, a lot of these type of films, one of the big reveals is that one of the characters is gay and is going to tell the parents for the first time, and, you know, the drama that's going to bring. I like how in this one it's just like they all knew she was gay. She's been openly gay for a while. This isn't news. You know, she's fine. You know, it's more just treating Jack like more of like committing to Jack instead of just treating her like a glorified babysitter. And I don't know why, because I like the acting, I like the reveal, I like the kind of interesting dynamic that you don't see played out in that when both are women, and the shared points of view that creates, especially in a relationship. It's neat to kind of get that insight that I wouldn't normally have. But I don't know, the added elements to their drama they don't land. It feels like one more thing to toss on to all of this other stuff that's already going on. Now, I don't know if that's really what happened in real life, But in terms of just the arc of the film, Scarlett Johansson's major arc is needing to let go of the perfect images she has of her father, which, okay, quick side digression. I love how that's represented in this film, how she'll look off at a house or a field, and then we'll get kind of these crudely hand-drawn animations of her as a young person, and both of her fathers sharing an experience. Very much a child's memory. Very much the memory of youth and not one of a mature, experienced adult. So I love the way that's handled. And also it's kind of interesting as she is the one that's old enough to have firm memories of both of them. So whereas the other two may only have memories of one, or maybe not even that well-defined memories of their father, she actually does have more to go on. So therefore you can see why the trauma and everything is a little bit more ingrained in her. But her arc is getting over that and forming a stronger relationship with her son, who doesn't really know her that well. And to, again, to form that better connection with Jack. And I just think they add an element into it, which I won't give away, even though I've given away everything else. Sorry about that. I don't know. It just felt like too much. Like there was too much going on. As I said, especially if you can remove an element from the story and the rest of the story moves along and doesn't really suffer without that section being there, that usually means it's not needed. Especially, again, as I've already said, you had two other characters who could have desperately used a little bit more screen time to flesh out their individual stories. So, yeah, it's not bad. It feels like it's a little too much. Feels like piling on. That all being said, and that all being true, I must admit I enjoyed this movie. It was a warm, happy, very real, very grounded film. Like I said, I'm repeating myself, but that's okay. I'm just reiterating. The very real connection between the actors and this feeling that this was a family with history and connections that you can see in scenes where they're not even talking. They're just reacting to each other. It makes you feel like you're a part of this and you have some kind of stake in what goes down. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really well done movie. And kudos to Kristen Scott Thomas on her first directorial outing. I think did a really great job, told a really personal story in a really beautiful way. So I recommend it. So let's wrap this up. So final grade for My Mother's Wedding, I'm giving it a B+. Good, solid film. Gives you the wonderful feelings in your tum-tum, and doesn't dip into cliche and tropes, except to kind of give us a shorthand for what's going on. I think this one's a worthwhile watch. I'd be curious to hear what people with siblings, and especially sisters, think of this movie. I would be very curious to kind of know how, if they feel it's as accurate, coming from an actual standpoint of that. But I enjoyed it, and I recommend it. Go seek this one out. Okay, so that's all the time I have. So thank you for coming along with me. Thanks for listening to me ramble, and I hope you are doing well. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.